Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Alviar. I'm here to read another chapter of Cabin on Trouble Creek by Jean Van Leeuwen, and it is the month of. Oops, other way, Mr. Alviar. Other way. There we go. November. Chapter 9. This is for you, Rowan. 6 weeks at the outside. Daniel could hear Pa's words inside his head clear as ever. But 6 weeks had passed, and now 7. Still, there was no sign of Pa and Ma and the rest of the family. What could have happened to them? Sickness, maybe. Ma might still be feeling poorly, or one of the little ones could have been taken sick. That would have kept them from starting out on time. Or it could be they had run into trouble on the way. Their wagon might have broken down in the mountains. Daniel had seen that happen on their own journey, as well as fierce storms that left huge fallen trees blocking the road. Or it might be they'd had trouble getting a boat to carry them upriver. Any of these things could be the cause of the delay, he told himself. But Pa would keep going. He wouldn't let anything hold him back for long. Daniel had no doubt he'd be coming any day now. In the meantime, though, he had new worries. You see, it was getting colder. Most of the leaves had fallen, leaving the trees stark and bare. And now the sun's rays could find their way through the treetops, yet they barely warmed the cabin. The days were growing shorter, too. The boys had to drag in larger logs to keep their fire burning all day, and they were starting to use the woodpile. Down at the creek, the water had turned icy cold, so cold that Will's feet grew numb as he stood holding his fishing spear. When he came out, he could barely stand. Soon, perhaps, the creek would freeze over. And then how would they catch fish? Food was what worried Daniel the most. The molasses jar was empty now, the salt just about gone, and the sack of cornmeal was going down surprisingly fast. They had plenty of nuts, but nuts weren't enough to fill their hungry stomachs. He had found that out when they were lost. If Pa didn't come soon, they could run out of food. Clothing was another problem. He and Will had only their thin toe-cloth shirts, and they had no wool coats for winter, no boots, and Will's shoes were about worn through. Daniel noticed when he left them on the creek bank to fish. Will never minded going barefoot, but he couldn't do that when winter came. And one more thing nagged at Daniel. It was a shadowy feeling. Not clear in his mind, but troubling just the same. You see, sometimes coming out of the cabin door in the morning or walking to the spring for fresh water, he had this odd sense that someone or something was watching him. It wasn't anything that he could put his finger on. He never saw any sign of another human or a lurking wild animal, other than the squirrels and an occasional rabbit, which bounded away at his approach. Daniel tried to push it out of his mind. He was imagining things, he told himself. They had been alone far too long. Still, he felt uneasy. Waiting and worrying weren't going to help. He needed to do something. But what? One morning, as he and Will were heading for the creek, they came on a rabbit sitting in the path just a few feet ahead of them. Daniel reached out to grab Will's arm, and they both stood still. For a moment, no one seemed to breathe, not the boys or the rabbit. Then Will's arm holding his fishing spear drew slowly back. The rabbit's long brown ear twitched, and Will hurled his spear, and at the same instant the rabbit hopped, and the spear flew harmlessly into the brush, and in 3 more quick hops the rabbit was gone. "I'm not fast enough," Will muttered in disgust, picking up his spear. Luckily it was not broken. The rabbit had been so close. Seeing it filled Daniel once more with a powerful longing for meat. Not like fish, which never quite filled you up, but something that stuck to your insides for a good long while. A rabbit stew. He could almost taste it. Will must have been thinking the same thing. I could make a heavier spear for hunting," he suggested as they continued down the path. "Maybe," said Daniel. He needed to think on this, figure it out a while. Would a heavier spear work, or might it be better to try some kind of a trap? Well, despite this accidental meeting today, it was hard to get close to a rabbit. Always its long ears and keen nose warned the animal that a human was near, and that it would bound off in a quick zigzagging hop, leaving you looking at its bouncing white tail. Will might hunt for hours and never get close enough to throw a spear, but a trap could be set and keep working while they did other things. Yeah, Daniel decided, a trap was the thing to try. But how to make one when they had no tools but an axe and a knife? So he studied on that all day. Something was nudging at the edges of his mind, something that Pa had said, maybe. He couldn't quite latch onto it, though. At least not until that evening, when he sat with Will, starting to carve out another bowl by the light of the fire, and it came to him all at once. You see, a while back, Pa had told him a story about his own pa when he was a young man. A bear had been troubling the settlement by stealing hogs, so he and his neighbors had gotten together and set a trap. And sure enough, they'd caught that bear and killed it. That was how Grandpap came to have a bearskin rug on the floor of his cabin. Daniel had asked about the trap. He remembered this. What kind of a trap could catch a bear? And Pa told him it was made of heavy logs so that it would fall on the bear when it came to take the bait. A deadfall trap, he called it. That was all that Daniel knew. But maybe they could build a trap almost like it, only smaller since they just wanted to catch a rabbit. And when he told Will, he seemed disappointed at first. Daniel knew he had his heart set on carving a new, heavier spear. "Well, go ahead and make one," Daniel told Will. "It'll be good to have another spear, but let's try setting a trap too." The next day they began working on their rabbit trap. Just 1 log would be enough, Daniel figured, as long as it was a good, heavy one. He chose a log from the woodpile, and he and Will carried it to the spot where they'd seen the rabbit. They put it down on a little way off the path so it would look natural to a wild critter. And now came the tricky part. They needed to raise one end and prop it up in such a way that it would come crashing down when the rabbit came to take the bait. But it had to stay up until then. So the support had to be sturdy, but it had to fall easily when the animal brushed against it. They tried different arrangements. A straight stick set on top of a rock, or on top of 2 rocks, or 2 sticks. Sometimes the log didn't fall, and sometimes it fell too easily. "Ow!" yelped Will when it landed on his toes. Finally, Will came up with something Daniel would never have thought of. He whittled 2 sticks with his knife and placed the point of one into a tiny groove in the middle of the other. Then balanced that stick on a small rock, and it worked. At least it seemed like it would. "Now all we need is bait," said Daniel. Grasses were what rabbits always seemed to be nibbling on. He and Will hunted around for anything green, poking under fallen leaves, now dried and brown, and they found a few bits of grass. Will wandered down to the creek and came back with a little more green stuff. Daniel made a small pile of it. Carefully, he placed the pile at the back of the trap, so the animal would have to walk all the way in to reach it. "Looks tasty," said Will with a grin. "If I was a rabbit, I'd want to come in for a feed." For a final touch, the boys drifted leaves around the edges of the trap so that it would look just like an old fallen down log in the woods. Daniel stood back, looking with satisfaction at their morning's work. "You cannot catch Chi-Ma-Moose like that." Startled, Daniel turned around, and behind him was a tall and straight and dressed all in deer skins Native American. And we'll stop right there. Chapter 10, next week. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Rowan, thank you for the suggestion. I'm glad you're listening to this book. I hope others are too. It's one of my favorite books. Good night, everyone. Don't forget to brush your teeth, wash your hands and your face, get into your pajamas. Tell your parents you love them. They need it. Tell your siblings you love them. Give them a hug. Be good. Treat others well. Be grateful for the things that you have. And always know that you have more than enough. All right. Good night, everyone. Take care.